Ray Walker had stopped believing that doing the right thing actually changed anything a long time ago. 3 years earlier, he had been a detective in Chicago, the kind of cop who still thought rules mattered. That belief ruined his career. Ray had reported as senior officer after a young gay man died during what was supposed to be a routine arrest. The department buried the case. Witness statements disappeared. Security footage was lost. And somehow Ray became the problem instead of the men responsible. By the end of that year, his badge was gone, his reputation was destroyed, and nobody from the department answered his calls anymore. Now, at 35 years old, Ray spent most nights under broken engines instead of chasing criminals. He worked at a small repair garage on the east side of the city, usually taking the late shifts nobody else wanted. The pay was enough to survive, barely. The owner liked him because Ray worked hard and never complained. The other mechanics mostly left him alone because Ray had the kind of silence that made people uncomfortable. That Thursday night had already been long. Ray had spent 4 straight hours replacing a transmission while freezing wind pushed through the half-broken garage door. His hands hurt, his back hurt, and all he wanted was to go home, shower, and sleep for 10 hours straight. Instead, his co-worker Luis leaned against the toolbox beside him and said, "Come on, man. One drink. You look like you died 3 days ago." Ray kept tightening a bolt. "I'm fine. That's exactly what dead people say." Ray exhaled quietly. "Not tonight." Luis smirked. "You've said that every night for 6 months." Normally, Ray would still refuse. But something about the exhaustion in his chest felt heavier than usual. Maybe it was the cold. Maybe it was another nightmare the night before. Maybe he was just tired of hearing his own thoughts in an empty apartment. So 20 minutes later, Ray followed Luis into a crowded underground bar downtown called Mercury Room. The place was loud, packed, and warm enough that Ray instantly regretted wearing his heavy jacket. Colored lights flashed across the walls while some indie band played near the backstage. Most people there looked younger than him. Richer too. Luis disappeared almost immediately after spotting a woman near the dance floor. Ray wasn't surprised. He ordered a whiskey and stood near the far end of the bar, planning to leave after one drink. That was when he noticed the guy sitting alone 3 stools away. Dark sweater, black jeans, silver ring on one hand, expensive watch, though subtle enough most people would miss it. He looked maybe 28, clean cut, attractive without trying too hard. But what stood out most was the expression on his face. Tired. Not physically tired. The deeper kind. The guy checked his phone twice, then locked it again. Like he already regretted being there. Ray looked away. It wasn't his business. About 10 minutes later, 3 drunk men approached the guy. At first it looked harmless. Just drunk strangers talking too loudly. But Ray noticed the body language almost immediately. One leaned too close. One blocked the exit side of the stool. The third kept staring at the man's phone screen. Ray's shoulders tightened slightly. The guy tried ending the conversation politely. Ray could tell from the small, forced smile and the way he angled his body away. Then one of the men laughed loudly and said, "Wait, seriously? You were meeting a dude here?" Another grabbed the phone from the guy's hand before he could react. The mood shifted fast. "Oh my God," one of them shouted. "He's actually gay." A few nearby people looked over. Nobody moved. The dark-haired man stood up immediately. "Give me my phone back." The tallest guy smirked. "Relax. We're just having fun." Ray watched the man's jaw tighten. He was embarrassed more than afraid. That almost made it worse. One drunk idiot started recording with his own phone. "Yo, smile for the camera." The dark-haired man tried to leave, but another grabbed the front of his sweater. And just like that, Ray felt something old and familiar settle heavily in his chest. That exact moment. The moment where everyone sees what's happening and decides not to get involved. Ray looked around once. People were pretending not to notice. Bartender busy. Security nowhere close enough. The old anger rose slowly inside him. He stood up. Not dramatically. No shouting. No scene. He walked over calmly and stopped beside the group. "Let him go." The tallest man turned. "Mind your business." Ray looked directly at the hand gripping the sweater. "I said let him go." The guy laughed, and he shoved Ray lightly in the chest. "Or what?" Ray didn't move. The dark-haired man looked up at him, then, clearly surprised somebody had actually stepped in. Another drunk man squinted at Ray's face. Wait, I know you. You used to be a cop, right? Ray said nothing. The guy laughed harder. Damn, no wonder you got fired. That got a reaction from the others. The man holding the sweater pulled harder now, trying to provoke something. What happened, officer? Couldn't handle protecting little fags anymore. The entire bar suddenly felt quieter. Ray's face stayed completely calm. That usually scared people more. He grabbed the man's wrist fast enough that the guy barely reacted before his arm was twisted downward against the counter. Not violent enough to break anything. Just enough pain to make a point. The man cursed loudly. Ray leaned closer. You're drunk, so I'm giving you one chance to walk away. The second guy moved forward immediately, but Ray shifted his stance without even looking at him. Instinct, training, years of experience. And suddenly none of them seemed quite as confident anymore. Ray released the wrist slowly. Leave. For a second, Ray honestly thought they might attack anyway. Then one of them muttered, Forget it, man. The others backed off with a few final insults before disappearing toward the exit. The tension in the room loosened instantly. People went back to drinking like nothing happened. Ray hated that part the most. He turned toward the dark-haired man. You okay? The man nodded once, though his face was pale. Yeah. Ray picked up the phone from the counter and handed it back to him. Their fingers brushed for half a second. Thanks, the man said quietly. Ray shrugged. You should probably head home. The guy gave a small laugh. Yeah, probably. A minute later they stepped outside, through the back exit, into freezing night air. Snow drifted slowly across the empty alley behind the bar. The man rubbed his hands together, still shaken even though he tried hiding it. Ray took off his leather jacket and handed it to him. You don't have to. Take it. The guy hesitated before putting it on. It was obviously too large for him. For some reason, Ray noticed that immediately. The man looked up at him carefully. You really were a cop? Used to be. What happened? Ray stared toward the snowy street. Long story. The man nodded slowly like he understood there were things people carried that strangers didn't get to ask about. A black car waited across the street, engine running. Ray finally looked at him properly under the streetlight. He was beautiful, not in a flashy way, in a quiet way. Sharp eyes, tired smile, the kind of face that looked like it had learned how to hide loneliness too well. Thank you, the man said again, softer this time. Ray shoved his hands into his pockets. You didn't deserve that. For a few seconds, neither of them moved. Then a man asked, What's your name? Ray. I'm Nick. Ray nodded once. Nick smiled slightly. Can I ask you something weird? Depends. Why did you help me? Ray looked back toward the bar entrance. Because nobody else did. Nick stared at him after that. Not casually, like he was trying to memorize something. The driver across the street stepped out slightly, clearly waiting for Nick. Ray noticed the expensive car now. The tailored clothes. The watch again. Rich. Definitely rich. Which made the whole situation even stranger. Nick glanced toward the car, then back at Ray. Can I see you again sometime? Ray almost said no automatically. People didn't stay in his life long. He'd gotten used to that. But something in Nick's expression stopped him. Maybe it was how sincere he looked. Maybe it was the fact that Ray hadn't seen someone look relieved around him in years. So instead, he pulled an old receipt from his pocket, borrowed a pen from Nick, and wrote down his number. Nick looked weirdly happy about it. Good night, Ray. Good night. Ray watched the black car disappear into traffic before finally heading toward his truck. When he got home after midnight, he showered, dropped onto the couch, and stared at the ceiling instead of sleeping. He kept thinking about Nick standing under the streetlight wearing his jacket. About the way his voice sounded when he said thank you. About the way Ray's chest tightened when Nick smiled at him. Around 1 a.m, his phone buzzed on the coffee table. Unknown number. Ray stared at it for a second before opening the message. Can I see you again? Ray spent the next 2 days trying not to think about Nick Carter. Unfortunately, he failed almost immediately. The problem was not just that Nick was attractive. Ray had met attractive men before. Chicago was full of them. The problem was the way Nick had looked at him in that alley behind Mercury Room. Like Ray had done something far more important than stopping a few drunk idiots in a bar. Ray was not used to being looked at like that. By Saturday afternoon, he had opened Nick's message at least 10 different times without replying. Finally, while sitting alone at the garage during lunch break, he typed, "Depends where." The answer came less than 30 seconds later. "There's an art event tonight. Nothing fancy. I'd like the company." Ray stared at the message suspiciously. Nothing fancy usually meant fancy. Still, at 7:30 that evening, Ray found himself parking his old truck in front of a massive glass building downtown. The moment he stepped out, he already knew he had made a mistake. Valets in black coats moved expensive cars toward a private entrance. Men in suits stood near the doors talking quietly into earpieces. The building itself looked like it belonged in a different world from Ray's life entirely. Ray checked the address again. Same place. He almost got back into his truck. Then his phone buzzed. "I'm inside. Please don't leave." Ray exhaled slowly and walked toward the entrance. The security guard looked at his worn boots first, then his jacket, then his truck behind him. "Invitation?" Before Ray could answer, another voice cut in. "He's with me." Nick walked down the lobby stairs wearing a dark charcoal suit with the sleeves rolled slightly past his wrists. His hair was styled differently tonight, cleaner, sharper, and somehow he looked even younger under the bright lights. Several people in the lobby immediately noticed him, and the way they reacted told Ray everything. This was not some rich guy with a comfortable office job. This was someone important. Nick stopped in front of him and smiled softly. "You came." Ray crossed his arms. "You forgot to mention your version of not fancy includes a skyscraper." Nick actually looked embarrassed. "Okay, that part's fair." Ray glanced around the massive lobby again. "Who exactly are you?" Nick hesitated for half a second too long. Then a woman passed nearby and smiled politely. "Good evening, Mr. Carter." Ray looked back at Nick immediately. Nick sighed quietly. "Yeah, that." Ray stared at him. "Carter, as in Carter Group?" Nick nodded once. Ray almost laughed from disbelief. Carter Group was everywhere in Chicago. Tech investments, media companies, logistics, real estate. Ray had probably spent years fixing delivery trucks owned by companies connected to them without realizing it. And now he was standing in their headquarters wearing oil-stained boots. Nick noticed the shift in his expression instantly. "Ray, you could have warned me." "I know. You said art event. There's art upstairs." Ray rubbed his jaw slowly. "Jesus Christ." For the first time since they met, Nick looked nervous. Not socially awkward nervous. Genuinely worried Ray might walk away. "I didn't tell you because people act weird when they know who I am." Ray gave him a look. "Can you blame them?" Nick looked down briefly before answering. "No, not really." That response stopped Ray more than he expected. Most rich people defended themselves immediately. Nick didn't. The silence stretched awkwardly for a few seconds before Nick spoke again. "You can still leave if you want." Ray looked at him carefully. Underneath the expensive suit and polished image, Nick still looked exhausted. Same eyes as the bar. Same loneliness. Ray sighed. "I drove all the way here already." The relief on Nick's face appeared so fast, it almost made Ray smile. The gallery upstairs turned out to be smaller and quieter than Ray expected. Modern photography lined the walls while soft jazz played through hidden speakers. Wealthy people wandered around holding wine glasses and talking in low voices about things Ray did not understand. Nick stayed close beside him the entire time. At first, Ray thought it was because Nick was being polite. Then he realized people kept approaching Nick every few minutes. Investors, executives, socialites. And every single conversation felt fake enough to make Ray tired just watching it. One older man shook Nick's hand and immediately said, "Your father wants you at the investor dinner next week." Not hello. Not how are you. Just business. Nick smiled professionally. "I know." Another woman touched Nick's arm lightly and whispered, "You really should smile more tonight. Reporters are here." Again, Nick smiled. The second she walked away, the smile disappeared. Ray noticed all of it. About an hour later, Nick finally escaped onto a quieter balcony overlooking downtown Chicago. Cold wind moved through his hair as he loosened his tie slightly. Ray leaned against the railing beside him. "You hate this stuff." Nick laughed quietly. That obvious? You look like a hostage. That made Nick laugh for real this time. It was a good sound. I used to think I'd get better at pretending, Nick admitted. Turns out I just get more tired. Ray studied him silently for a moment before asking, so why do it? Nick shrugged lightly. Because my last name pays for everything around me. The honesty surprised Ray. Nick leaned against the railing beside him. You know what the funny part is? What? At Mercury Room, nobody knew who I was. They just saw some gay guy alone at a bar. Ray's jaw tightened slightly at the memory. Nick looked at him carefully. You didn't care. Ray frowned. About what? My money. My name. Any of it. That's because I didn't know. Nick smiled faintly. Even after you found out, you still talk to me the same way. Ray looked away toward the city lights. Should I not? No, Nick answered softly. Please don't. Something shifted slightly between them after that. Not dramatic. Not obvious. Just closer. Later that night, Nick insisted on driving Ray home himself instead of letting a company driver do it. The black sedan moved quietly through downtown traffic while soft music played from the speakers. For a while, neither of them talked much. Strangely, it wasn't uncomfortable. At a red light, Nick glanced toward Ray. Can I ask you something? Sure. Why'd you really leave the police department? Ray stared out the window for several seconds before answering. I reported someone. Nick waited. Nobody cared. The car grew quiet again. Finally, Nick said, I'm sorry. Ray shrugged once. You weren't the one who did it. Nick's grip tightened slightly on the steering wheel. Still, Ray looked over at him then. Nick meant it. Not polite sympathy. Real anger. Real disappointment. Ray suddenly realized how rare that had become. When they reached Ray's apartment building, Nick parked at the curb, but didn't unlock the doors immediately. I had a good time tonight, he admitted. Ray smirked slightly. Even with me insulting rich people half the evening? You specifically insulted billionaires. Important distinction. Nick laughed again. There it was. That same real laugh from the alley. Ray found himself watching Nick's mouth for half a second too long before looking away. Nick noticed anyway. The silence inside the car changed. Softer now. Heavier somehow. Nick spoke carefully. There's something else I wanted to ask you. Ray raised an eyebrow. My company's been dealing with security problems lately. Leaked information. Threats. Some harassment issues during public events. Nick hesitated briefly. I trust you. Ray blinked once. You barely know me. I know enough. That's a terrible survival instinct. Nick smiled slightly. Maybe. Then more seriously, I'm offering you a consulting job. Ray stared at him immediately. Nick, it's temporary, Nick added quickly. And I'm not doing this because you helped me. You sure about that? Yes. Ray studied him carefully. Nick held eye contact the entire time. No pity. No charity. Just trust. That somehow made it harder to refuse. Finally, Ray leaned back against the seat and sighed. I'll think about it. Nick's smile returned slowly. That's all I'm asking. As Ray stepped out of the car a minute later, Nick rolled down the window. Hey, Ray. Ray looked back. Nick smiled softly under the city lights. I'm really glad you answered my text. Ray told himself accepting the consulting job was a bad idea almost every single day during the first month at Carter Group. The problem was not the work itself. The work was actually good. Nick had not lied about the security issues. Confidential company files had been leaking to media outlets before public announcements. Private schedules were somehow reaching paparazzi, and someone had even managed to bypass internal access systems twice in the past 6 months. Ray approached the situation the same way he used to approach investigations back when he still carried a badge. Quietly, patiently, watching people more than reports. And very quickly, he realized the biggest problems inside Carter Group were not technical. They were human. Some employees stopped talking whenever he entered a room. A few executives clearly disliked the fact that Nick trusted an ex-cop with no corporate background. One senior manager, named Victor Hale, barely tried hiding it. Victor was polished, wealthy, and permanently smug in the way men often became when they had spent too many years protected by power. The first time Ray met him, Victor shook his hand while looking at the old scar across Ray's knuckles and asked, "So this is the security expert?" Like it was a joke only rich people were supposed to understand. Ray did not react. Victor hated that immediately. Meanwhile, Nick somehow became the only part of the job Ray actually looked forward to. It happened slowly enough that Ray almost didn't notice it at first. Late-night meetings turned into late-night conversations. Coffee runs became dinners. Dinners became long drives through downtown with no real destination. Nick started showing up at the garage some evenings just to sit nearby while Ray worked on engines. The first time it happened, Ray looked under the hood of an old Mustang and asked, "You seriously drove 30 minutes to watch me replace brake pads?" Nick sat on a workbench wearing an expensive coat that definitely did not belong inside a mechanic shop. "Maybe I like the company." Ray shook his head. "You need hobbies." Nick smiled. "I'm looking at one." That should not have affected Ray as much as it did. But it did. Because Nick flirted differently from anyone Ray had known before. There was no arrogance in it. No performance. Nick looked at him carefully every time he spoke, like he genuinely cared what Ray thought about things. Nobody had done that in a very long time. One night after work, Nick convinced Ray to eat at a tiny noodle place hidden between two apartment buildings downtown. It was nearly midnight, and the place was almost empty except for a tired college student asleep in the corner booth. Nick sat across from Ray in a black sweater with his sleeves rolled up, laughing quietly after accidentally dropping chopsticks for the third time. "You're terrible at this," Ray said. "I grew up eating expensive catered food. Nobody taught me survival skills." Ray smirked slightly and reached across the table to fix the chopsticks in Nick's hand. Their fingers brushed again. This time neither of them pulled away immediately. The moment stretched longer than it should have. Nick looked at him differently after that. Softer. By the second month, Ray knew exactly when Nick was overwhelmed before Nick even said anything. He noticed the tension in his shoulders during board meetings. The way he rubbed his wrist when stressed. The fake smile he used around investors. Nick carried pressure constantly, and the more Ray saw of Carter Group, the more he understood why. Nick's father rarely spoke to him like a son. Mostly he spoke to him like a future headline. Every public appearance was controlled. Every rumor was managed. Even Nick's dating life had apparently been filtered through PR teams for years. One evening, Ray walked into Nick's office after everybody else had left and found him sitting alone in the dark. Only the city lights outside illuminated the room. Nick didn't look up. "Do you ever get tired of pretending you're okay?" Ray closed the door quietly behind him. "Every day." Nick laughed softly, though there was nothing happy in the sound. "At least you're honest about it." On the desk sat several gossip articles with Nick's face across the front page beside a famous actress. Carter Air spotted with mystery woman. New power couple. Wedding rumors grow. Ray understood immediately. Nick leaned back in a chair and stared at the ceiling. "My father arranged the whole thing. Said the shareholders would relax if people stopped talking about my personal life." Ray's jaw tightened. "That's insane. Welcome to my family." For a while, neither spoke. Then Nick quietly admitted, "Sometimes I think people would be less disappointed if I just became somebody else completely." Ray looked at him sharply. "Don't say that." Nick finally looked over. "Why not?" "Because there's nothing wrong with who you are." The room went silent after that. Nick stared at him with an expression Ray couldn't fully read. Something vulnerable. Almost fragile. Ray suddenly became very aware of how close they were standing. Nick spoke softly. "You really believe that?" "Yes." Nick looked down briefly, then laughed under his breath. "You have no idea what hearing that sounds like after years around people like this." Ray wanted to say more. Instead, he just rested one hand lightly against the edge of Nick's desk beside him. Close enough to touch. Not touching. That somehow felt even more dangerous. The line finally broke 2 weeks later. A thunderstorm had rolled across Chicago that night, flooding half the streets downtown. Most employees had already left Carter Group headquarters early, but Ray stayed late reviewing security footage connected to another information leak. Around 10:30, he found Nick alone in the underground parking garage beside his car. Nick loosened his tie tiredly. "Please tell me you're done working." "Almost. You said that 3 hours ago." Ray shut his laptop bag. "You keeping track of me now?" "Maybe." Rain hammered loudly against the concrete outside, while distant thunder shook the building slightly. Nick leaned against the side of the car, watching him quietly. "You know something?" "What?" "You're the first person in years who makes me feel calm." Ray looked up slowly. Nick took a step closer. Neither of them looked away. Ray could hear his own heartbeat now, which annoyed him because he had spent most of his adult life being impossible to rattle. But Nick standing there in the dim garage lighting with rain echoing around them somehow felt more dangerous than any fight Ray had ever walked into. Nick's voice lowered slightly. "Tell me to stop." Ray should have. Instead, he said nothing. That was all the answer Nick needed. Nick grabbed the front of Ray's jacket and kissed him. It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't rushed. It felt careful. Like Nick had wanted to do it for a very long time, but still wasn't completely sure Ray would let him. For half a second, Ray froze. Then he kissed him back. Harder this time. Months of tension broke open all at once. Nick's hand slid against Ray's neck while Ray pulled him closer instinctively. The kiss deepened immediately, messy and breathless and real enough to make Ray forget where they even were. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. Nick looked stunned. Ray probably looked worse. Then Nick laughed softly against his mouth. Okay, so that definitely happened. For the first time in years, Ray actually laughed too. After that night, everything changed. Nick started spending more evenings at Ray's apartment instead of his own penthouse. They cooked terrible dinners together at midnight because neither of them remembered grocery shopping properly. Nick stole Ray's hoodies constantly. Ray pretended to hate it even though he secretly liked seeing Nick walk around his apartment, looking comfortable there. One rainy Sunday morning, Ray woke up and found Nick asleep against his chest while soft music played quietly from the living room speaker. Ray stayed awake almost an hour just looking at him. That terrified him more than anything else. Because somewhere along the way, this had stopped being temporary. And deep down, Ray already knew people like him didn't get to keep good things forever. The destruction started on a Wednesday afternoon. Ray walked into a conference room and immediately felt the tension. 3 executives stopped talking the second he entered. A news article sat open on the screen. The headline read, "Carter Air linked to EX disgraced police officer." Ray's stomach dropped instantly. More articles followed within hours. Old department records, false accusations, edited reports painting Ray as unstable and violent. Paparazzi photos of him entering Nick's apartment building at night. Someone had been watching them. Victor Hale entered the room 10 minutes later wearing the faintest smile imaginable. "I warned Nick personal attachments could become liabilities," he said calmly. Ray stared at him coldly. "You did this." Victor adjusted his cufflinks. "I protect the company." Ray stepped closer immediately. Victor's smile faded slightly then. "Careful," Victor said quietly. "You already lost one career." He paused. "Would be unfortunate if Nick lost his future too." That night, Nick arrived at Ray's apartment furious enough to shake. "My father wants me to publicly deny everything," he said. "He thinks this is all some phase that can still be cleaned up." Ray stayed silent too long. Nick noticed immediately. "Don't." Ray looked away. "Ray, this is hurting you." "I don't care." "But I do." Nick stepped closer desperately. "I'm not losing you because rich people are uncomfortable." Ray wanted to believe that could be enough. God, he wanted to. Then 3 nights later, someone attacked him outside the garage after work. 2 men. Fast. Professional. Not random. Ray fought them off, but not before taking a hard hit across the ribs and another above his eye. When he finally made it back to Nick's penthouse past midnight, blood stained the side of his shirt. Nick opened the door, saw him, and went completely pale. "Oh my God, I am okay." "That is not okay." Nick grabbed his face carefully with shaking hands while panic filled his voice. Who did this? Ray already knew, and suddenly one horrible thought became impossible to ignore. As long as Ray stayed beside Nick, this would never stop. That night, long after Nick finally fell asleep beside him, Ray sat awake staring out across the city skyline. Then quietly, without waking him, Ray stood up and left. Nick woke up just after 6 in the morning to an empty bed and cold sheets beside him. At first, he thought Ray had gone downstairs for coffee. Then he noticed the apartment was completely silent. No music from the kitchen. No low voice talking to himself while cooking. No sound of the shower running. A bad feeling settled into his chest immediately. He grabbed his phone. No messages. Then he saw the note, left beside the lamp. You deserve a life that doesn't hurt this much. Nick stared at the sentence for a very long time. Then he crushed the paper in his hand, so hard his knuckles turned white. For the next 3 days, Ray Walker disappeared. His apartment was empty. The garage said he never showed up for work. His phone went straight to voicemail every time. Nick barely slept at all. He spent most of those days either fighting with his father and the Carter Group board or sitting silently in Ray's apartment waiting for someone who never came back. Victor Hale, meanwhile, moved quickly. More articles appeared online. More reporters crowded outside Carter Group headquarters. Investors started demanding statements about Nick's poor judgment and unstable public image. Nick's father called emergency meetings almost every night trying to contain the damage. But Nick stopped caring about the company the moment Ray disappeared. On the 4th night, Nick finally exploded during one of the board meetings. Victor was speaking again, calm and polished as always, talking about necessary sacrifices and protecting corporate stability, when Nick suddenly slammed both hands onto the conference table hard enough to silence the entire room. You knew about the attack. Victor froze slightly. Nick stepped closer. Don't insult me by pretending otherwise. Victor adjusted his tie carefully. You're emotional right now. You sent people after him. That's a very serious accusation. Nick laughed once. Cold. Angry. And you're a very careful coward. The room went dead silent. Nick's father stood up immediately. Nicholas. No. Nick turned toward him with tears already burning behind his eyes. You all keep acting like this is about business. His voice cracked slightly for the first time. I love him. Nobody spoke. Nick looked around the room at every expensive suit, every controlled expression, every person trying to calculate damage instead of understanding pain. Then he quietly said, and not one of you even asked if he survived. He walked out before anyone could stop him. That same night, Nick finally got the first real lead. Luis, Ray's co-worker from the garage, called him around midnight. I think I know where he went. 6 hours later, Nick was driving through a small lakeside town nearly 4 hours outside Chicago, with barely any sleep and both hands gripping the steering wheel too tightly. The town was quiet, cold, the kind of place where nobody cared about headlines or billion-dollar companies. Nick found Ray exactly where Luis said he would be, a small repair garage near the lake. Ray stood under the hood of an old pickup truck wearing a dark hoodie with grease stains across both sleeves. For a second, Nick just sat frozen inside the car, staring at him through the windshield. Ray looked thinner already, more tired, like he hadn't slept either. Then Ray noticed the black sedan parked outside. Their eyes met across the garage. Neither moved. Finally, Nick stepped out of the car. Ray's expression barely changed, but Nick saw the tension immediately in his shoulders. You shouldn't be here, Ray said quietly. Nick walked closer. You left. Ray looked away first. I was trying to protect you. By disappearing, Ray shut the hood harder than necessary. You got attacked because of me. No, you got attacked because powerful people are afraid of decent men. Ray rubbed his face tiredly. Nick's voice broke this time. You don't get to decide my life for me. The cold wind coming off the lake cut through both of them, while silence stretched painfully between them. Ray finally spoke softer. You don't understand what people like Victor do when they feel threatened. Nick stepped closer anyway. Then explain it to me. Ray looked at him for a long moment before finally admitting the truth he had kept buried for years. The man I reported back then? Ray said quietly. Victor's brother-in-law. Nick went still. Ray laughed bitterly. Yeah. Took me a while to connect the names too. Everything suddenly made horrible sense. Victor hadn't targeted Ray just because of Nick. He already hated him long before that. He helped bury the case. Ray continued. Protected the officers involved. Protected the department. And when I wouldn't back down, he shrugged slightly. They destroyed me instead. Nick stared at him with tears slowly filling his eyes again. And now he's doing it again, Ray finished quietly. Only this time, it's you paying the price. For a few seconds, Nick couldn't speak at all. Then finally he walked forward and grabbed Ray's jacket tightly in both hands. I don't care about the company. Ray closed his eyes briefly. I care about you. That hit harder than any punch Ray had taken in years. Nick's voice lowered shakily. I spent my whole life surrounded by people who loved money more than people. Then I met you. His grip tightened, and you walked into a room full of strangers and protected me before you even knew my name. Ray looked down at him helplessly. Nick was crying openly now, and somehow that made Ray's chest hurt even worse. I'm not leaving you behind just because terrible people want me scared, Nick whispered. Ray finally broke. He pulled Nick against him so suddenly that Nick nearly stumbled forward into his chest. Then Ray kissed him hard enough to steal the rest of the sentence away completely. The kiss tasted like exhaustion and relief and weeks of fear finally collapsing. Nick kissed him back immediately. When they finally pulled apart, Ray rested his forehead against Nick's and laughed quietly under his breath. I tried really hard to let you go. Nick managed a shaky smile. Yeah, you're terrible at it. For the first time in days, Ray smiled too. 3 days later, both of them returned to Chicago together. And this time, neither planned to run. Nick used his authority inside Carter Group to launch a formal internal investigation into Victor Hale's financial activity. Ray handed over everything he still had connected to the old police cover-up case. Emails, old recordings, names Victor never realized Ray remembered. The deeper investigators dug, the uglier things became. Bribery, evidence tampering, illegal security contracts, payoffs connected to both Carter Group and members of the Chicago Police Department. Victor tried denying everything at first. Then the arrest started. The media frenzy exploded almost overnight. This time, though, public opinion shifted fast, especially after details from Ray's original case resurfaced. Former officers finally came forward anonymously. One retired detective admitted evidence had been intentionally buried years earlier. Ray would never fully get his old career back. But for the first time in years, people stopped calling him disgraced. A week later, Nick stood backstage before a massive Carter Group press conference while reporters crowded outside like sharks smelling blood. You ready? One assistant asked nervously. Nick looked toward Ray, standing near the hallway entrance. Ray nodded once. That was enough. A few seconds later, Nick walked onto the stage. And instead of standing alone, he reached back and took Ray's hand before cameras across the room immediately exploded with flashes. The entire room erupted with shouting questions. Nick ignored all of them. For years, he said calmly into the microphone, people around me treated honesty like weakness. He glanced toward Ray beside him. Then I met someone who taught me the opposite. The room fell quieter. Nick squeezed Ray's hand slightly. I'm done apologizing for who I love. For the first time since this entire nightmare started, Ray felt something inside his chest finally unclench. 6 months later, life looked completely different. Ray opened his own garage near Lake Michigan with money Nick insisted was an investment, though both of them knew Ray would never stop calling alone. Nick divided his time between Chicago and the lake house they bought together outside the city. And for the first time in either of their lives, home actually felt peaceful. One summer evening, Nick sat on the hood of Ray's restored Mustang while sunset reflected across the water nearby. Ray walked over holding 2 beers. Nick smiled up at him softly. You know, you still look intimidating when you're emotional. I'm not emotional. You proposed to me yesterday. Ray handed him a beer. That was different. Nick laughed warmly. Then Ray stepped closer, slid one hand behind Nick's neck, and kissed him slowly under the fading orange light. No cámaras. No reporters. No fear. Just them. And after everything they survived to reach that moment, it was more than enough. And maybe that is what love really is in the end. Not grand speeches, not perfect lives, not people without scars. Just 2 souls who keep choosing each other after every hard day, every fear, every reason to walk away. Ray stood up for a stranger one cold winter night, never knowing that moment would lead him to the one place he had been searching for all along, home. And Nick finally found someone who loved him for who he truly was, not for the name he carried. Thank you so much for listening until the very end, and we'll see you again in the next story.